Spider-Man: The Untold Story. Based on an unproduced film outline by Stan Lee. Adapted by Tim Maxwell. This is the astonishing tale of two men, each with extraordinary superpowers. One is capable of great good, while the other has the potential to annihilate the world. Chapter 1: A New Hero. In the living room of a respectable but run-down neighborhood in New York, May Parker nervously brushes a spider web away with her broom. She detests spiders, their delicate threads seemingly mocking her unease. Today, her anxiety isn't just about spiders. She is uneasy about going to bed with the flu, making it impossible for him to accompany her. However, her 20-year-old nephew, Peter Parker, who lives with them, volunteers to go along. Peter is a bright young man, an orphan taken in by May and Ben after his parents' untimely death. He is dedicated to his studies, often burying himself in books and scientific journals, striving to secure a scholarship for college. His thin frame is a testament to his preference for intellect over physical prowess. The journey to the bank is uneventful. May and Peter walk through the bustling streets of New York, the city's cacophony providing a stark contrast to the quiet tension within May. They reach the bank, complete their transaction, and begin their return home. May clutches her purse a little tighter, the weight of the cash inside a tangible reminder of their vulnerability. As they navigate a quieter street, their path is suddenly obstructed by two muggers. Their intentions are clear, their demands immediate and menacing. Peter, driven by a mix of protective instinct and youthful bravado, chooses to fight rather than flee. His attempts are valiant but futile against the mugger's brute strength and experience. He is quickly overpowered, beaten to the ground, and the muggers escape with the money. Peter's frustration and anger are palpable as he helps his trembling Aunt May to her feet. He berates himself for not being stronger, for not spending more time building his body instead of his mind. His scholarly pursuits seem insignificant in the face of such raw violence. May, despite her fear and the loss, tries to console him, but Peter's sense of failure is overwhelming. The next day, despite his bruises and aches, Peter attends a lecture by Dr. Otto Octavius, a world-renowned atomic scientist. Dr. Octavius is set to demonstrate a new type of Waldo, a mechanical arm used for handling radioactive materials. The press has nicknamed him Doc Ock due to the resemblance these arms give him to an octopus. Dr. Octavius's brilliance is matched by his eccentricity, a strange gleam in his eyes hinting at an intense, almost fanatical dedication to his work. The demonstration is astounding. Dr. Octavius manipulates the heavy metal arms with incredible skill, aided by special anti-gravity microchips of his own invention. These devices reduce the weight of the arms, making them easy to lift and control. Despite the success of his invention, Dr. Octavius remains secretive, unwilling to share his breakthrough until it is fully perfected, envisioning the immense fortune it could bring. During the lecture, Peter, an avid photographer, tries to capture the moment with his camera. However, Dr. Octavius, paranoid and protective of his work, smashes the camera in a fit of rage, accusing Peter of trying to steal his secrets. Embarrassed and upset, Peter leaves the auditorium, with Dr. Octavius's angry gaze following him. Later, as Peter heads home, he runs into Liz Allen, a fellow student at Eastern State University. They share a sandwich, Liz attempting to lift Peter's spirits. Peter is smitten with Liz but feels inadequate, believing she would never be interested in someone like him. He expresses his desire to quit college and find a job to support Aunt May and Uncle Ben, who are struggling financially. Liz sympathizes, though her interest seems more physical than philosophical. Their conversation is interrupted by Flash Thompson, the confident and popular star quarterback of the ESU Tigers. Flash enjoys taunting Peter, whom he derisively calls Puny Parker, the walking wimp. After a few minutes of mockery, Flash leaves with Liz, leaving Peter feeling more dejected than ever. Meanwhile, in his cluttered brownstone apartment, Dr. Octavius broods, surrounded by his scientific devices and caged birds. The birds are his only companions, the misanthropic genius preferring their company to that of people. Resuming his dangerous experiments, Octavius is determined to increase the power of his anti-gravity microchips, a gleam of madness in his eyes, hinting at the danger he poses. Determined to find a part-time job, Peter visits the Daily Bugle, New York's largest tabloid, to apply as a freelance photographer. However, the irascible publisher, J. Jonah Jameson, overhears Peter and angrily orders him out, branding him a hippie troublemaker. Jameson's black-and-white view of the world leaves no room for young, aspiring photographers. As Peter leaves, Joe Robbie Robertson, the Bugle's compassionate city editor, offers a word of encouragement, suggesting Peter return another time with his photos. Despite the setback, Peter is grateful for the small kindness. As Peter wanders the streets, he unknowingly approaches Dr. Octavius's brownstone, where strange lights and sounds emanate from the scientist's lab. Inside, Dr. Octavius reaches a crucial point in his work. A beam of laser light from one of his microchips causes a microscope to fly to the ceiling, flattening it. The scientist's breath is labored, sweat beads on his forehead, and his eyes are wide with excitement. He has unleashed fantastic power, but can he control it? Suddenly, there's a tremendous explosion. The impact hurls Peter back against a parked car, almost knocking him out. By the time he recovers, Dr. Octavius has been carried out on a stretcher, headed for the hospital. Peter dismisses the incident as just another New York mishap, unaware of its significance to his own future. At the Daily Bugle, Jonah Jameson continues to write editorials about the city's increasing crime rate. City editor Robbie Robertson points out that Jameson has always opposed more funding for the police. Jameson, unfazed, smugly notes that crime news boosts circulation. Consistency is not a trait he values. Jealous of Liz Allen's attention to Flash Thompson, Peter tries out for the football team. Flash seizes the opportunity to have his teammates steamroll Peter, using every trick to ensure his failure. The coach eventually suggests Peter stick to his studies to avoid injury. Peter knows Flash is behind this new humiliation, but there is nothing he can do. The worst part is that Liz was watching. In the hospital, Otto Octavius begins to recover. Miraculously, the explosion has grafted his Waldos to his body and enhanced their power. Now able to control the steel arms as if they were his own, he is also driven mad by the accident. Doc Ock, as he will come to be known, becomes a dangerous force, escaping the hospital by smashing through walls with his powerful appendages. Back at Eastern State University, Dean Samuelson warns Peter that he must attend classes regularly to keep his scholarship. Though Peter's focus on helping Aunt May and Uncle Ben is understandable, he cannot afford to miss tonight's science seminar. Peter leaves the dean's office, running into Liz, who invites him to a Bruce Springsteen concert. Frustrated, Peter has to decline, knowing he cannot miss the seminar. Liz is disappointed, and Flash takes the opportunity to ridicule him again. Meanwhile, in his apartment, Dr. Octavius experiments with his anti-gravity beam, sending a parrot cage high into the air and freeing the bird before crashing the cage to the ground. His maniacal laughter echoes through the night as he contemplates the terrifying potential of his new power. His ultimate goal is a grand, fearsome crime that will cement his place as the most feared man on Earth. That evening, at the science seminar, a spider accidentally exposed to radiation bites Peter on the hand before dying. Peter feels faint, but brushes off the incident. On his way home, he is confronted by the same muggers who attacked him and Aunt May. This time, Peter's newfound strength and agility surprise him. He easily overpowers the muggers, sending them fleeing in terror. Realizing he now possesses the proportionate strength and abilities of a spider, Peter tests his powers by climbing walls and leaping great distances. Back home, he is overwhelmed by the implications of his transformation. When Aunt May offers him tea, he declines, desperate to process what has happened. As the world focuses on an upcoming summit of world leaders at the United Nations, Peter continues to experiment with his abilities. He considers using his powers to earn money, but is conflicted about causing harm. After a failed attempt to join a wrestling match, he is approached by a fast-talking manager, Fast Al Fallon, who sees potential in Peter's abilities. Peter declines, still unsure of how to use his newfound powers responsibly. Doc Ock, meanwhile, begins using his anti-gravity beam to commit crimes, stealing jewelry and robbing armored cars with ease. His growing confidence and madness make him a formidable and dangerous adversary. Peter's journey of self-discovery and responsibility is just beginning. His powers are both a gift and a burden, and he must find a way to use them for good in a world filled with danger and uncertainty. The stage is set for the emergence of a new hero, one who will face incredible challenges and make sacrifices in the pursuit of justice. Chapter 2: Emergence of the Spider-Man. Peter Parker's life had been relatively simple before that fateful day at the science seminar. But everything changed when a radioactive spider bit him, granting him extraordinary abilities. As the initial shock wore off, Peter couldn't resist testing his newfound powers further. It began with small, seemingly harmless experiments, leaping from rooftop to rooftop, scaling walls with ease, and feeling the enhanced agility coursing through his veins. His strength, too, was astounding. He could lift objects that previously would have required machinery. It was during one of his late-night excursions across the city that Peter stumbled upon a group of thugs harassing an innocent bystander. Without a second thought, he sprang into action. The fight was over almost before it began. Peter's reflexes and strength made short work of the criminals. He felt a rush of exhilaration as the thugs lay defeated at his feet, and the grateful victim thanked him profusely. But Peter knew this was only the beginning. He had a responsibility to use his powers for good, and he needed to be more than just a guy in street clothes tackling petty criminals. Inspired by his favorite comic book heroes, Peter decided it was time to create an alter ego. In the small, cluttered confines of his bedroom, Peter began experimenting with different designs and materials. He needed something that would conceal his identity, provide protection, and enhance his abilities. Hours turned into days as he sketched ideas, tested fabrics, and tinkered with various gadgets. The result was a red and blue costume, sleek yet durable. It was designed with a spider motif, complete with a mask that covered his entire face, leaving only the expressive white eye lenses. The suit was flexible enough to allow full range of motion, yet strong enough to withstand the rigors of crime fighting. But the costume was only part of the equation. Peter's mind raced with possibilities as he recalled the properties of a spider's web. He set up a makeshift lab in his Aunt May's basement, using his scientific knowledge to develop a synthetic web fluid. After countless trials and errors, he finally perfected the formula. He fashioned compact web shooters that he could wear on his wrists, allowing him to shoot webs, swing through the city, and immobilize enemies. With his new identity and equipment ready, Peter took to the streets once more. This time, he was no longer just Peter Parker. He was Spider-Man. The city quickly took notice. News of a masked vigilante began to spread, with reports of a spider-themed hero stopping muggings, preventing burglaries, and thwarting carjackings. At first, the public was skeptical. Some saw Spider-Man as a menace, a masked vigilante who took the law into his own hands. Others viewed him as a hero, someone willing to do what the police couldn't. As for the criminals, they quickly learned to fear the figure in red and blue who seemed to appear out of nowhere, dispensing justice with a mix of acrobatics and webbing. One night, Peter was patrolling a dimly lit alleyway when he heard a scream. Without hesitation, he swung towards the sound, landing in front of a woman being accosted by two burly men. The thugs sneered at the sight of him, but their bravado quickly faded as Spider-Man dispatched them with a series of swift, precise movements. The woman thanked him tearfully before running to safety. As Spider-Man stood in the alley, the adrenaline pumping through his veins, he realized something profound. He had the power to make a real difference. The city needed him. But with great power, there also came great responsibility. And so, Spider-Man became a legend. The name struck fear into the hearts of criminals and brought hope to the citizens of New York. Peter Parker's life had changed forever, but as he swung through the city, he knew he was on the right path. Chapter 3: Tangled Webs. The interior of the Midtown Manhattan Bank was a scene of eerie calm, interrupted only by the soft hum of machinery and the occasional whimper of a terrified teller. Doc Ock, also known as Dr. Otto Octavius, stood in the center of the chaos, his presence both commanding and nonchalant. This marked his third practice job, a term he used to describe these calculated heists designed to hone his skills and test his latest technological advancements. Doc Ock's mechanical tentacles moved with an almost elegant precision, each one a seamless extension of his will. The anti-grav ray, a recent addition to his arsenal, was in full operation, effortlessly levitating stacks of money from the teller's cages and into his waiting appendages. The bills floated in midair, forming a slow-moving, orderly procession towards him. His face bore a relaxed smile, a stark contrast to the panic that surrounded him. For Octavius, this was a display of power, a demonstration of his intellect and superiority. One of the bank guards, summoning a surge of bravery, aimed his gun at Octavius. Without so much as a glance, a free tentacle lashed out, striking the weapon from the guard's hand and sending it skittering across the floor. The guard, now weaponless and trembling, watched in horror as the anti-grav ray was redirected towards the fallen gun. The weapon hovered in the air, pointing menacingly back at him, a clear message that resistance was futile. The sudden blare of the alarm system shattered the relative quiet of the bank, signaling the imminent arrival of law enforcement. Octavius remained unfazed, continuing his methodical looting without any sign of urgency. He whispered to the exotic bird perched on his shoulder, a rare falcon with sleek feathers, "Be patient, my little one. Sooner or later, Spider-Man will appear and try to stop us. We must wait." His enjoyment was palpable. The anticipation of a showdown with his nemesis added a layer of excitement to the heist. Across town, Peter Parker sat at the modest kitchen table in his Aunt May's house, the room thick with a quiet tension. Aunt May, her face lined with worry, stared at a daunting pile of bills. She sighed deeply, clutching the papers in her frail hands as if they might provide some miraculous solution to her financial woes. The money from Uncle Ben's insurance was running out, and she was contemplating renting out their small guest room to make ends meet. As she spoke of her concerns, Aunt May suddenly gasped for breath, clutching at her chest. She was having a heart attack. Peter's heart raced with fear and urgency. He quickly wrapped a blanket around her and half-carried her into the street, frantically waving for a taxi. The need for speed was critical. An empty taxi stopped at a red light just in front of them. Peter rushed to open the door, but the driver waved him away, stating he was off duty and beginning to pull away. Desperation surged through Peter. He couldn't let the cab leave. With Aunt May barely conscious in his arms, Peter reached down and grabbed the taxi's rear bumper. Using his superhuman strength, he stopped the car in its tracks, the vehicle screeching to a halt. He then tugged the bumper, pulling the taxi back so that he and the driver were face to face once more. The stunned driver, wide-eyed at Peter's feet, complied with his command to head for the hospital without further protest. As the taxi sped through the bustling streets of New York, Peter glanced out the window and noticed a girl watching him. She was the same girl he had seen earlier at the airport, looking through the phone book. She stood on the sidewalk, her eyes fixed on him with intense curiosity. As the taxi pulled away, she took out a small notebook and began jotting down notes, her gaze shifting between Peter and the entrance to Aunt May's building. It was clear she had taken a keen interest in what she had just witnessed. At the hospital, Peter paced the waiting room, his mind a whirlwind of anxiety and guilt. Liz Allen, a supportive friend, arrived to offer comfort. Together, they visited Aunt May, who was now resting comfortably. The doctor assured them that her heart attack had been mild, but she needed rest and medication to recover fully. As they left the hospital, Peter's mind was consumed with worry and determination. He turned to Liz, expressing his newfound resolve to find a way to bring in more money. Aunt May needed him now more than ever, and he couldn't let her down. However, balancing this responsibility with his college commitments seemed an impossible task. Walking through the streets, Peter and Liz passed the police station. A crowd of spectators and reporters had gathered, their attention focused on Doc Ock being led inside to be booked. The news photographers were trying to get pictures of him, but the police were holding them back, frustrating their efforts. Peter overheard some bystanders wondering aloud why someone as powerful as Doc Ock had allowed himself to be captured so meekly, why he made no effort to escape when the alarm went off. His curiosity piqued. Peter got an idea. He told Liz to go on ahead, feigning that he needed to return to the hospital because he had forgotten something. As soon as Liz was out of sight, Peter dashed into a nearby alley where he could change into his Spider-Man costume without being seen. Scaling the wall with ease, he positioned himself to get a clear view of Doc Ock through a window. Sticking to the wall, he took several photos of the villain, capturing images that were sure to be better than any the news photographers had managed to get. Peter raced to the Daily Bugle, where city editor Robbie Robertson bought his photos of Doc Ock for $300. Perhaps Peter had finally found a way to make the money he needed to help Aunt May. As Peter left, Jonah Jameson and Robbie discussed Dr. Octavius and his various colorful crimes, debating the motivations and potential future actions of the notorious scientist. Robbie mentioned another person people were talking about, some character named Spider-Man, who had recently performed incredible feats on a TV show. Jameson dismissed Spider-Man's performance as mere trick photography, not believing in the authenticity of the wall crawler's abilities. Despite Robbie's attempts to convince him otherwise, Jameson remained skeptical, writing off Spider-Man as just another costumed nut with a phony scam. Later, Peter, Liz, Flash Thompson, and some friends were in the campus lunchroom. Flash couldn't stop talking about how terrific his new idol, Spider-Man, was. Bored with the subject, Liz grabbed Peter's hand, and they sneaked away while Flash continued to drone on about Spider-Man's supposed abilities. Walking in Central Park, Peter told Liz he had decided to concentrate on making money as a freelance news photographer. He recounted how he had gotten lucky with some photos of Doc Ock, to which Liz replied that he couldn't expect to run into a villain like Doc Ock every time he went out. Peter was on the verge of revealing his secret identity to Liz when she expressed her disdain for Spider-Man, calling him a king-sized nerd and a total turnoff. She couldn't understand why people were so impressed by what he did, thinking it must be easy for him with all his powers. She shuddered at the thought of a half-man, half-spider, dismissing him as a freak who belonged in a circus. Once again, Peter decided against revealing his secret. As they headed home, Liz reminded Peter of an upcoming costume party. She wanted him to get a dynamite costume so they would stand out, but Peter only half listened, distracted by the sight of the mysterious girl who had been watching him earlier. She was still observing him. When she saw that Peter had noticed her, she quickly turned and walked away, leaving Peter puzzled. In jail, Doc Ock was locked in a cell with another prisoner while awaiting trial. He laughed and mocked the cops, declaring that he had allowed himself to be captured because he had something more important on his mind. No jail could hold him. Using his powerful tentacles, which the police couldn't remove as they had become part of his body, he easily bent the iron bars of the window in his cell. He lifted himself out, returning the bars to their original position before leaving. He left the other prisoner behind with a message for the world. Dr. Octopus's next feat would be the greatest crime of all time, with the greatest payoff ever. And no one, not even some fool in a spider suit, could stop him. Back at home, Aunt May had returned from the hospital. Peter was so concerned about her that he nearly revealed his secret while putting away his Spider-Man costume. He managed to hide it just in time. Despite Peter's pleas for her to take it easy, Aunt May resumed her routine of cooking, cleaning, and mothering him. She hoped to rent out the guest room soon. Alone in his room, Peter modified his camera, applying sticky webbing to its back so it could adhere to any surface. He rigged up a special automatic timer, preparing for more covert photography. Meanwhile, Aunt May placed a sign in the front window, advertising the room for rent. Peter apologized for the necessity, but hoped they would find a dependable, well-paying tenant soon. In his Spider-Man costume, Peter swung among the rooftops, performing dramatic stunts and positioning his camera to take photos of himself. He aimed to capture images that would bring in much-needed money. As Peter Parker enters the Daily Bugle, he carries his latest batch of photographs. He hands them to Robbie Robertson, who carefully reviews the images of Spider-Man. Jonah Jameson, making his usual rounds, glances at the photos with his characteristic disapproval. He expresses his disdain for Spider-Man and questions the source of Peter's images. Despite his irritation, Jameson begrudgingly instructs Robbie to pay Peter for the pictures, marking a small but promising step in Peter's journey to earn an income. Leaving the Bugle building, Peter spots the enigmatic girl who had previously been shadowing him. Determined to find out more, he approaches her before she can slip away. She remains mysterious, offering no concrete answers about her identity and instead providing only vague and evasive responses. Despite Peter's attempts to keep her from leaving and to gain information on how to contact her, she departs, melting into the throng of the street, leaving Peter with more questions than answers. Chapter 4: Man on a Tightrope. The rooftops of New York were Spider-Man's domain, his playground and his refuge. Tonight, Peter Parker, clad in his red and blue suit, was prowling these heights with a specific purpose. He had his camera, rigged with an automatic timer and some sticky webbing, set to capture images of his daring stunts. High above the city, he swung from one building to another, each leap more audacious than the last. To add a touch of spectacle, he spun his webbing across the street and began to walk the tightrope-like strand with the balance of a seasoned circus performer. Unbeknownst to Spider-Man, Dr. Octopus was also roaming the streets below. His eyes caught sight of the agile figure above, gracefully walking on a line of web. A smirk spread across Oc's face as he produced his anti-grav ray and aimed it at the unsuspecting hero. The ray's force lifted Spider-Man off his web, flinging him into the air like a helpless marionette. Octopus reveled in the power he held over Spider-Man, flipping him repeatedly, enjoying the helplessness of his enemy. But something caught Octopus's attention, something that made him turn away abruptly, slipping into the shadows and leaving Spider-Man to regain control. With the anti-grav ray no longer affecting him, Spider-Man grabbed his web line, steadying himself. But his respite was short-lived. From below, gunfire erupted, bullets zipping past him. The source of the attack was the police, who mistakenly thought Spider-Man was a threat to the high-profile convoy passing below, carrying heads of state arriving for the upcoming UN summit. A news broadcaster's voice wafted up from an open window, reporting on the supposed terrorist threat from a masked maniac on a high wire. Realizing the danger of staying, Spider-Man fled, swinging swiftly away from the scene. Back home, Peter found Aunt May in an unusually good mood. She had rented out the guest room to a new tenant, a respectable and professional bachelor. Peter tried to share in her happiness, but his mind was preoccupied. The news of Dr. Octopus's escape from prison weighed heavily on him. his eyes lingering on the photograph of the villain in the newspaper. That evening, Peter sat at dinner with Aunt May, his thoughts on Spider-Man's deeds and the conversation he wished he could have with her about his alter ego. Each time he tried to bring up the topic, she would change the subject, chattering about her new tenant, Peter's studies, or the dangers of the city. Her disdain for Spider-Man was palpable, and Peter found himself unable to tell her the truth. He simply wished her good night, the words of confession stuck in his throat. The next day, Peter rode the subway, the familiar rattle and hum of the train a backdrop to his thoughts. A group of hoodlums began to terrorize the passengers, brandishing knives and chains. Peter, without his Spider-Man costume, felt a pang of helplessness. Memories of his uncle's death and the realization that he had once failed to act when he could have intervened spurred him into action. He shorted the train's electrical system, plunging the car into semi-darkness. Under the cover of this dim light, Peter took down the thugs with swift, precise blows, his identity masked by the shadows. Returning home, Peter resolved never to be caught unprepared again. He donned his Spider-Man suit, then layered his street clothes over it, ensuring he was always ready for action. Examining himself in the mirror, he was satisfied with how the costume remained hidden beneath his civilian attire. The doorbell rang, and Peter found Liz Allen, dressed as Martha Washington, reminding him of the costume party they were supposed to attend. Peter had forgotten, but he quickly adapted, tearing off his street clothes to reveal his Spider-Man suit. Liz was unimpressed, but Peter's resolve was firm. At the party, Peter's Spider-Man costume garnered mixed reactions. Other partygoers donned poorly made replicas of his suit, including Flash Thompson. Peter discreetly adjusted his own costume to blend in better, but a moment of panic struck when he mistook a costumed guest for Doc Ock. The scare led to ridicule from the crowd and a taunt from Flash, challenging Peter to prove his worth as Spider-Man. Peter turned the tables, suggesting a more dangerous stunt, and though Flash backed down, Liz's opinion of Spider-Man remained unchanged. Meanwhile, Dr. Octopus prowled the city, searching for Spider-Man with a relentless determination. Aunt May continued to praise her new tenant, who she claimed had brought new life to her. Peter, eager to help, decided to raise more money for a small dinner party May wished to host for her tenant. Changing into Spider-Man, he set out with his camera, determined to capture more photos. On a desolate street, Peter stashed his clothes and set up his camera, only to be interrupted by the sound of fire engines. An apartment building was ablaze, with someone trapped inside. Spider-Man's attempts to assist were initially thwarted by suspicious police and firemen, but he eventually made a daring rescue. However, his troubles were not over. Returning to retrieve his clothes, he found them missing, taken by a wino. The ensuing chase and the arrival of police nearly exposed him, but Spider-Man managed to escape with his clothes, though disheartened. Upon arriving home, Spider-Man noticed the mysterious girl watching from across the street. Quickly changing back into Peter Parker, he approached her. She introduced herself as Dana, an Interpol agent assigned to the summit meeting security. Dana had followed Peter after witnessing his display of strength, concerned he might be a threat. However, her interest had become personal, driven by intrigue and attraction. The following day, Peter spoke with Aunt May's doctor, who praised the positive impact of her new tenant on her health. When Peter finally met the tenant, he was shocked to see Dr. Otto Octavius standing before him, his new enemy now living under the same roof. Chapter 5: The Looming Catastrophe. The morning began quietly in the Parker household. Aunt May bustled around, preparing breakfast, humming a cheerful tune. The new tenant, Dr. Otto Octavius, emerged from his room, his heavy sweater concealing the mechanical tentacles that lurked beneath. To the casual observer, he seemed like any other middle-aged man, a slight paunch giving him a benign, if not slightly cumbersome appearance. Peter Parker found himself in an awkward position as he and Dr. Octavius exchanged pleasantries. Ock mentioned vaguely recognizing Peter from his lectures, casting a shadow of unease over their interaction. Peter, caught between the familiarity of home and the danger embodied in his aunt's guest, struggled to keep his composure. Aunt May, oblivious to the tension, remarked on Peter's shyness, her voice filled with fondness. Peter excused himself under the pretense of studying, retreating to his room where he released his pent-up frustration with a punch to the wall. Below, the sound of Aunt May's laughter mingled with Octavius's polite responses. Peter grappled with the conflict. Exposing Ock would shatter Aunt May's newfound happiness, yet allowing him to remain posed an undeniable threat. As evening fell, Octavius ventured out, and Peter, ever vigilant, donned his Spider-Man suit and followed. In the shadows, he trailed Octavius to a seedy dive on the Lower West Side. Peering through a grimy window, Spider-Man watched as Ock engaged in a hushed conversation with a red-headed man, money exchanging hands. Before he could gather more information, his clumsy movement dislodged a cornice, alerting Octavius to his presence. With alarming speed, a tentacle shot up, seizing Spider-Man and dragging him into a fierce battle. The deserted industrial neighborhood provided the perfect battleground. Spider-Man's youthful exuberance and inexperience soon gave way to Octavius's calculated ferocity. As the fight raged on, it became clear that Spider-Man was outmatched. A well-timed intervention by the police saved him from a potentially fatal end. Wounded but resolute, Spider-Man retreated, vowing to recover and confront Octavius again. Meanwhile, the city buzzed with anticipation for the upcoming UN summit. World leaders converged on New York, and security measures were unprecedented. The Daily Bugle's office was a hive of activity, with J. Jonah Jameson at the helm, barking orders to ensure comprehensive coverage of the historic event. In a more insidious corner of the city, Octavius methodically inspected the UN building's foundation. Making notes and calculations, his sinister plans began to take shape. Despite guards ushering him away, his preparations were complete. Back at the Parker household, Peter watched a news broadcast featuring the UN building. His spider sense tingled as he caught a glimpse of Octavius, reinforcing his suspicion. Aunt May, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, commented on Octavius leaving without tidying his room, an uncharacteristic oversight. Peter, masking his urgency, excused himself and rushed to investigate. In Ock's room, he found remnants of blueprints and diagrams of a massive anti-gravity device. The implications were clear and terrifying. Donning his Spider-Man suit, Peter swung into the night, his resolve hardened. At the UN, security agents, including Dana from Interpol, were confident in their precautions. Helicopters armed to the teeth circled above, creating a fortress in the sky. However, the tranquility was shattered as the building began to tremble. Outside, onlookers and newscasters were thrown into chaos as they witnessed a helicopter emitting a strange beam towards the UN building. Doc Ock's plan unfolded with terrifying clarity. His giant anti-gravity ray, a monstrous version of the device he had used before, was lifting the UN building from its foundation. The world watched in horror as the structure began to rise, severing its connection to the Earth. The scene was apocalyptic. The ground below remained still, unaffected, while the building ascended, driven by Octavius' madness. Spider-Man, arriving at the scene, looked up in dread. The stakes had never been higher. As the summit delegates scrambled, he knew the time had come for a final confrontation with Dr. Octopus. Chapter 6. Elevated Chaos. Inside the UN building, chaos reigned supreme. Panic, horror, and confusion gripped every individual within its walls. Security agents, including Dana, were at a complete loss, unsure of how to respond to the unprecedented threat. Above them, military helicopters zeroed in on Doc Ock's ship, prepared to eliminate the threat with force. But a sudden radio message from Doc Ock halted their advance. He issued a dire warning. The UN building was now suspended 100 feet above the ground, and any attempt to attack or damage his ship would result in the ray shutting off, causing the building to plummet and killing everyone inside. To demonstrate his control, Ak made the building tilt and sway, manipulating it with ease and showcasing his mad genius. The gravity ray lifted, moved, and shook the colossal structure as effortlessly as if it were a mere twig in a breeze. Across the world, in national capitals, leaders came to a grim consensus. They had no choice but to comply with Octavius's demands. The simultaneous death of all heads of state could lead to revolution, anarchy, and chaos, potentially toppling civilization itself. With his power established, Ak broadcast his demands over the radio. He demanded $1 billion from the United States, with proportional amounts from other nations based on their wealth. He also insisted on being given one of the 50 U.S. states to rule as his own nation, even stating he would accept a small one, like Rhode Island, because he was a reasonable man. His final demand was a grim ultimatum: total amnesty for himself worldwide and a lifetime exemption from paying taxes. Ak set a deadline of 3 hours for his demands to be met, warning that the gravity ray would lose its power after that time and could not be recharged. With that, he announced the end of communications and left the world to decide its fate. Global parliaments were paralyzed by terror and uncertainty, unable to devise a solution. Destroying Ak's ship would cause the building to crash, but failing to meet his demands would have the same result. The situation seemed hopeless. In Washington, D.C., despair hung thick in the air. The world looked to the United States for a solution, blaming it for the predicament. However, one man refused to give up. Spider-Man stood on the roof of a nearby building, waiting for the UN building to come within web shooting range. When it finally did, he swiftly attached his webbing to the bottom of the structure and climbed up to the captive building. Unseen by Ak, who was still gloating in his helicopter, Spider-Man clung to the building's wall, biding his time. Dana, inside the building, spotted the web slinger, but was unable to communicate with him. The perfect moment arrived when Ak ordered his pilot to fly close to the UN building to taunt the heads of state. Seizing the opportunity, Spider-Man shot a web at Ak, pulling him out of the helicopter and onto the building. With Ak now facing Spider-Man on the side of the building, the pilot was left alone in the helicopter, helplessly keeping the anti-grav ray trained on the building. The sky darkened as the world held its breath. The UN building, an icon of global diplomacy, now hovered ominously hundreds of feet above the ground, defying gravity through the mad genius of Dr. Octopus. This was the stage for one of the greatest battles of all time, as Spider-Man and Dr. Octopus prepared for their final confrontation. Spider-Man clung to the side of the building, his agile form a stark contrast to the monstrous presence of Dr. Octopus. The villain's metal tentacles, extensions of his own will, slammed into the building's facade with brutal force. Each strike sent shards of steel and concrete cascading down, providing Ak with handholds to maneuver. The building groaned under the assault, tilting and shuddering as the two arch foes prepared to clash. The first move came in a blur of motion. Spider-Man launched himself towards Dr. Octopus, his body a whip of muscle and sinew. But Ak's tentacles were ready, lashing out with the speed and precision of vipers. They hammered the building, tearing out chunks of concrete, creating a chaotic battlefield hundreds of feet above the ground. The world watched in stunned silence, eyes glued to their screens, as the titanic struggle unfolded. Spider-Man darted and twisted, his reflexes a blur of motion as he avoided the crushing blows. He struck back with webs, trying to entangle the tentacles, but Ak's mechanical limbs were relentless, smashing through the sticky strands. The building shuddered violently, the structure protesting the intense combat. Inside, terrified diplomats and workers clung to anything solid, praying for salvation. The battle raged on, a deadly dance of agility versus power. Spider-Man's acrobatics kept him one step ahead, but Ock's tentacles struck with unyielding force, each impact sending shockwaves through the building. The once majestic structure now resembled a war zone, with debris raining down on the streets below. The tilt became more pronounced, a precarious angle that threatened to send them all plummeting. As the fight reached its zenith, Spider-Man's determination burned bright. He moved with renewed vigor, a blur of red and blue against the grim backdrop of destruction. He closed the distance, his fists striking with precision and power. Each blow disoriented Dr. Octopus, the villain's control slipping with every hit. Spider-Man's webbing finally found purchase, binding the tentacles to the building in a desperate bid to immobilize his foe. With a final, mighty effort, Spider-Man delivered a devastating kick to Ock's chest. The villain reeled, his tentacles flailing uselessly as he was pinned against the building. The UN structure, battered and bruised, began to descend slowly, its engines sputtering as they struggled to maintain altitude. The world watched, breathless, as Spider-Man stood victorious, his chest heaving with exertion. As the building descended gently, tilting slightly over the East River, a hand emerged from a window, cutting the webbing that held Dr. Octopus. Weak and groggy from the battle, Ock fell into the river and disappeared beneath its murky surface. The waters swallowed him whole, leaving his fate uncertain. Had he drowned, or would he resurface in the future? Spider-Man shoots his webbing to the nearby helicopter and swiftly climbs aboard. The pilot, panicky and desperate, is in no condition to resist. He was just getting paid to fly the chopper, and this whole situation is far beyond his expertise. With the pilot incapacitated, Spider-Man draws upon all of Peter Parker's scientific knowledge to figure out the controls of the anti-gravity ray. Using his ingenuity, Spider-Man manages to activate the device and skillfully navigates the UN building, bringing it safely back to the ground. Amidst the chaos, Spider-Man found Dana and confronted her. She admitted to freeing Doc Ock, revealing that he was her father. Heartbroken, Spider-Man watched as Dana walked away, blending into the crowd of survivors. The following day, Peter confided in Liz about his worries for Aunt May, who had developed a crush on her tenant. Liz offered to accompany him to cheer May up. At the house, Aunt May surprised Peter by showing him a fan letter she was writing to J. Jonah Jameson, whom she found charming and masterful. Relieved, Peter left with Liz, feeling lighter than he had in days. In the bustling offices of the Daily Bugle, Jonah Jameson's sharp reprimands echoed as he chastised Peter for his failure to capture the dramatic clash between Spider-Man and Doc Ock. Despite the harsh criticism, Peter remained composed, his resolve unshaken. With Liz by his side, he exited the building, her arm nestled comfortably around his waist. As they strolled away from the chaos of the newsroom, Peter's silhouette stretched across the adjacent wall, gradually morphing into the iconic shadow of Spider-Man. The shadow grew larger and larger, eventually enveloping the entire scene, symbolizing not just the conclusion of a tumultuous chapter, but the dawning of a new beginning, poised on the horizon of their unfolding lives.